So I'm going to very briefly first say a few words about IFRI, as I was encouraged to do so, but I'll do that very, very quickly. So IFRI is the French Institute of International Relations, Institut Français des Relations Internationales. It's based in Paris. It's one of the main European think tanks. We publish a lot, organize a lot of events. I won't detail that. If you want to check everything, including my report, it's on IFRI's website, www.ifri.org. So now this report, once a jihadist, always a jihadist. First, I have to show you a few figures. This is the rise of the number of terrorist convicts in open custody in France since mid-2016. So what you can see is that there's a sharp increase. It started from 70 in mid-2016, and it's now around 320. Of course, the government anticipated this increase. It was expected to have a sharp increase because it was known that a lot of terrorist convicts would be released from jail. In 2018, I published another report that's also on IFRI's website called 137 Shades of Terrorism. I analyzed the cases of 137 terrorist convicts in France from 2004 till 2017, and half of them had been convicted in 2016 and 2017, so it was pretty recent. And one of the lessons learned from the report was that the average length of a sentence for terrorism in France was around 7 years in jail. So it's not a surprise that you have that many people who were released because, of course, if you take the year 2019, for instance, you have people who went to Syria in 2012 or 2013, who came back to France, were sentenced to jail, and then released after a few years. So the government had anticipated this event and this phenomenon, and decided to design a program to try and avoid recidivism. And what you have to know is that we didn't have at that time all the studies that we had after, like the one by Thomas Renard in Belgium or the one by Omi Hodvitz in the US about the low rate of terrorism recidivism. And so the feeling of the government was that something had to be done more specifically for this public. And so in 2016, an experimental program was opened in Paris. It was called RIVE, and it was designed for people in open custody convicted on terrorism charges. And most of them were released from jail, and others actually were in pre-trial detention. It was a 6-hour per week program, and there were only 22 participants for the 2-year period from 2016 to 2018. But the results were encouraging. There was no terrorist recidivism after this 2-year period. So the government decided to broaden and to scale up the program, and a new call for tenders was launched in 2018. There were new specifications for this new program. First, the possibility of housing, because the Ministry of Justice realized that a couple of individuals who had been released from jail prior to the opening of the new program were actually homeless once released from jail. And they thought that it was actually a danger to have these people homeless somewhere in the streets of Paris or other cities. And so the new call for tenders decided to address the issue by having this possibility of housing. And the second new specification was a more intensive program with up to 20 hours per week for a participant. The program was also broadened to 3 other cities. So it's Paris that already existed, and then Marseille, Lille, and Lyon. It's the largest social enterprise group in France called Groupe SOS that won the 4 lots. And the new program was called and is still called PAIRS. So IFRI was actually appointed to review and evaluate this program, and I ended my study in October 2020, but the program is still running. So from the beginning of the program in October 2018 till the end of my study in October 2020, there were 120 participants who went through the program in the different cities, Paris being the main center with 63 individuals, and Lille, which is also the newest center, had only received 11 participants when I finished my study. There are actually 2 different distinctions to have in mind with regards to the participant. The first one is related to the first statistics that I'm currently showing on the screen. So there are a vast majority, 77% of the participants were prosecuted on terrorism charges, but it's not the only public, the only participants. You also have a minority, 23%, who are actually people who were convicted for ordinary crimes, but considered as radicalized by the prison administration. And then another important distinction is between the people in pre-trial custody, open custody, that's 22%, and the majority, 78%, who have already been convicted and released from jail. So what's the content of the program? There are 3 arms in this program. The first arm is a social arm where social workers help participants in their daily life. So it means finding a home, so housing, finding a job, doing administrative work, for instance, opening a bank account or having national health insurance. Well, basically everything that can be done by social workers in a traditional program to avoid recidivism, with some capacities perhaps that you wouldn't have in other programs. For instance, the fact that some of the participants are indeed housed by the program. It means that everything is paid off by the program itself. The second arm is the psychological arm. Many participants, it's hard to know the exact figure, but I'd say it's around 25%, suffer from mental health issues. Some of them, but that's really an important minority, have true and real psychiatric problems and need to be taken in charge either in psychiatric hospitals or by psychiatrists. But then you have more participants who have some kind of mental troubles and who can be taken in charge by the psychologist of the program itself. So that's for the second arm. And the third arm is an ideological one with imams or Islamologists who were hired directly by Group SOS to discuss religious topics with the participants and also to go to mosques with them or to Islamic bookshops and to, again, discuss the concept, discuss what the preachers would say, and try and make them evolve in terms of their ideological point of views. So in total, you can see that it's a multidisciplinary approach. All these different arms work together. They write reports every 3 months together, and they try to share their expertise on the different participants. So here are examples of activities that go on during this program. You have, of course, face-to-face interviews, so that's really classic. For instance, you have interviews with psychologists, so it's really what you could have in any other program of that kind. But then you also have more original activities like visits at home. That's true when the housing is provided by the program, but also when the participants live on their own in their families or elsewhere. The staff can simply knock on their door and check what's going on at home. You also have vocational activities, for instance, voluntary work, professional training. They visit job centers, fairs, so the staff basically try and help them find a job. It's as simple as that. There are also activities oriented towards religion, as I said before, going to the mosque, to Islamic bookshops. And that's pretty interesting because there are a lot of criticisms about this one. It's the activities that look recreational, but have actually other purposes. For instance, practicing sports, doing horse riding, visiting museums. Sometimes it can sound naive when you look at that from the outside. One of the criticism is that this program look, according to some critics, like a summer camp. But actually, when you talk to the staff and also to the participant, you understand that it's not purely recreational, and that actually when they do this kind of activities, the participants speak up their mind, that they say things that they wouldn't say in face-to-face interviews, and they are also put in different environment, and you can observe how they react. So there are a lot of details in my report about that, but I think that it's important to really go and check the details about these so-called recreational activities that are actually not that recreational. And you also have collective activities. So the visits or the debates can be done either with only one participant or with several of them. And here you can really observe the group dynamics and how they interact together. So I identified a few difficulties with regard to PAIR. The first one is the assessment of the evolution of the participants. It's actually quite striking when you talk to the staff that they lack risk assessment tools. Of course, some of them know the traditional risk assessment tools like VERA2R or ERG22. By the way, Sophia Koller wrote a really interesting report about the risk assessment tools that was published in February by DGAP. So the participants know some of them, but sometimes and they are quite critical about them. And they think that these tools actually have flaws and that they prefer not to use them. The problem when you're an outsider like me and that you talk then to the staff and you ask them how they assess the evolution of the participants is that you lack a standard. You lack norm, you lack tools, and so you have very subjective assessments. So I think that here you have really room for improvements. Another problem is the training of the staff. It's actually very hard to have people specialized in radicalization, and you need to train them. The problem is that here again, they lack time and they lack actually the people who can really train on a regular basis the staff. And so I think here again, there's room for improvement in having people more specialized in radicalization issues. This problem of training is really important because that's another difficulty. The program, suffers from turnover. It's actually a hard job. It's not that well paid. Sometimes there are security issues, even though it's not the main argument that people put forward or highlight when they explain why they left the program. But the fact is that the staff, if you consider the staff, there's a high level of turnover. And that's an issue because obviously we need more stability. Perhaps if you pay them better, it will solve part of the issue, but probably not the whole problem. Because also the turnover is linked to frictions with other institutional actors. And if you talk to the staff, they will explain that they have a social culture. They really want to help the participants rehabilitate and live a normal life again. But there are other actors in the ecosystem who do not have this social culture. You have, of course, the Ministry of Justice, who has more a culture of control, and you have the Ministry of Interior that has more a culture of surveillance. And sometimes there are real frictions between these three cultures and these three kinds of actors. Another difficulty, and that's the last one that I will mention, is that the program can be interrupted for people in pre-trial custody if they are condemned. And that creates frustration for the staff, but also for the participants. And of course, if you take disengagement or deradicalization by the book, one will tell you that rehabilitation should start at the earliest stage as possible. When people start being taken in charge by the justice, you should immediately start trying and prepare for when they will leave jail or when they will be released. But actually, what I saw is that it can also be problematic because if the people then are sentenced once their program has already started and they have started their rehabilitation, then it will create more frustration and anger. So I just wonder whether this usual lessons learned from deradicalization, that is to say that it should start as early as possible, is really as valid as we think. The main results, and that's really my final slide, is that there's not a single case of terrorist recidivism out of 64 convicted terrorists. So that's really encouraging, I think. And there's actually one terrorist convict who went back to jail, but not on terrorist charges. So it was, I think, for a drug case. It was, well, for at least for, I mean, for classic or ordinary criminality. However, there are several cases of reincarceration among the participants convicted for ordinary crimes. So that's the second category, the minority category that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation. And what it means is that it's much harder actually to stabilize people who are used to criminality. That's something that can be expected, but in the case of pairs, that's really obvious. So you have approximately, I'd say, 1/4 of the participants who were ordinary criminals who actually went back to jail, and only one of them was linked to radicalization. For the other, it was just another sentence for an ordinary breach of the law. Another important result is that participants do not have a linear evolution. So sometimes they have impressive progresses, they improve a lot, and the staff is really optimistic, and suddenly they jump back. And so it's really puzzling, and of course the staff tries to understand why this evolution is linear. But one of the conclusions is that one should not be too optimistic or pessimistic when something goes well or bad, because it can, turns quite quickly, and then it can improve again after a while. And of course, it's important in each case to have an individualized approach to try and understand what happened. So in total, I'd say that it's very encouraging, but it's fragile. So I guess that we should continue this program, probably broaden it in the zones of France where it has not been developed yet, because it's only, as I told you, in 4 cities for the moment. And we should, of course, continue to evaluate the participants, but also evaluate the program itself. So I'll leave it here. The whole study, as I told you, is on IFRI's website. And if you want to contact me, you have my email address on the slide. Thank you very much.